In this last video for the first part of our course, I wanted to describe a little bit more what some of the different microbes are. And you might have heard some of these terms in our previous videos, but to just define them a little bit more, there are two major types of cellular organization. There are organisms that are called prokaryotes, and literally that translates to pre-nucleus. And what that means is that within these cells that we call prokaryotes, they do not put their DNA in a special compartment. So they have their DNA just kind of free floating within the cell. And in this cartoon of a classic prokaryote, this purple clump here that looks a lot like, a purple clump of noodles, represents the DNA. But it's not subdivided in any special way. It's just kind of free floating within the cell itself. So that compartment where some cells might store their DNA is called a nucleus. And because these cells evolved before the nucleus, they are called pre-nucleus. Two of our three domains that were introduced in the previous video are prokaryotes. They lack a nucleus. And those are our bacteria and our archaea. The bacteria, the domain bacteria, will contain our pathogens, but only some of the bacteria are pathogenic. In previous slides, we saw lots of examples of bacteria that are not pathogenic, that do really beneficial things for humans, or just are environmental and don't interact with us at all. People who study bacteria specifically are bacteriologists. It's the science of bacteriology. Generally, when people think of microbiology, they're mostly thinking of bacteria, but that's a pretty narrow way of thinking about microbiology. So bacteria will contain our pathogens, but again, only some bacteria are pathogens. The other domain that are prokaryotes are the archaea. Generally, archaea are what we call extremophiles. They thrive in extreme environments. Very, very hot, very, very cold, very, very salty, very, very acidic. They have a way of maintaining their cells and doing metabolism, a type of biochemistry that is novel or new. Well, I shouldn't say it's new to us. We have not really understood it before. Of course, they are ancient and have been doing it for millions of years, but they do this type of metabolism and this type of biochemistry that we are still learning about and still learning to understand. So two of the three domains belong to this classification of prokaryotes. They lack a nucleus. Prokaryotic, and generally we're going to be talking in this class about bacterial cells because archaea are not known to be pathogens. We don't know of any archaea that cause disease in humans. And since this is Revenge of the Killer Microbes, we're going to talk about mostly bacteria because that's what's trying to kill you. Generally, prokaryotic cells are very small. They will range from 1/2 to about 2 micrometers. So a micrometer, that's what this little symbol here means, micro. A micrometer is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. And a meter is just over 3 feet. So if you took 3 feet, about 3 feet, and divided it into 1,000,000 pieces, that's about the size of a bacterium. In contrast, human red blood cells, which are some of the smallest cells that humans have, are about 7.5 micrometers. So here they're showing a picture of a tick, and then in comparison, how big red blood cells are, bacteria, viruses, and DNA. So for the most part, our prokaryotic cells are smaller than eukaryotes. There are some exceptions, but that's pretty rare. And prokaryotic cells can come in lots of different shapes. We call this kind of rod shaped, we call that a bacillus. This circle shape we call a coccus. There's an intermediate, coccobacillus. Good luck identifying that under a microscope. That's pretty challenging. We have these kind of curved cells that are called vibrio. We have kind of wavy cells that we call spirillum. And then we have really like tight curls, almost like a corkscrew, that we call spirochetes. So we have lots of different shapes in our prokaryotic cells as well. And some of the archaea have even weirder shapes. These are mostly bacterial shapes. Archaeal shapes can be even more strange. We also have different arrangements of microorganisms. They can be found in chains, and we call a chain a streptococcus, like Streptococcus pyogenes, which causes strep throat. They can be found in groups of 4, they can be found in clumps, they can be found in big clusters like Staphylococcus, like Staph aureus, which is MRSA. Bacillus cells can also be found in chains. You can have these weird like rosette structures, and here's some kind of interesting shapes like a star shape or even a square. So the shape and arrangement can vary, but what's usually consistent is if an organism or if a species has a particular shape, all members of the species should have the same shape. It's relatively uncommon that a bacteria can change its shape. It happens sometimes, but more commonly, if they are a shape, that is their shape. The third domain of life consists of the eukaryotes. So one domain, it does include things like plants, animals, fungi. And eukaryote, if you translate it, it means true nucleus. So if you see this carry word, that always means nucleus. So eukaryotes have a true nucleus. That's illustrated right here in this diagram of a very weird hybrid eukaryotic cell. But within this structure called the nucleus, that's where we keep our DNA. There are some pathogens that belong to this group, some killer microbes. The killer microbes that belong to the eukaryotes that we'll talk about will include things like some of the fungi and some parasites, including things like tapeworms. Eukaryotes will also include insects and other arthropods. Insects and arthropods are very important to talk about because they often transmit disease, like mosquitoes can transmit things like malaria or West Nile virus. Sometimes insects can also make you sick just by their bite or their sting. So a lot of the bees and wasps, other arthropods like scorpions and spiders, through their bite or their sting can make you sick. In terms of the fungi, we'll talk about a number of different fungi, but as a brief introduction, most of the fungi that cause really severe human disease can change their shape. I told you most bacteria don't change their shape, and that's true, but a lot of fungi can. And they can change from a mold, which is like a filament type shape, to a yeast, which is a circular type shape. And so these are really good at causing human disease. Some examples of fungi that we'll talk about later that cause human disease include Candida. Candida causes yeast infections and thrush. We also have the dermatophytes, which cause things like ringworm, athlete's foot, jock itch. So dermatophyte means they like the skin, right? Derma is skin. Phyte actually means plant. People used to think they were plants, but they're fungi, but they still have that same name. Some of the parasites are shown here. These are unicellular parasites. A lot of them cause diarrhea, like entamoeba and giardia can cause diarrhea. Plasmodium, that's malaria. Toxoplasma, this is the one that you can get from cats. So we'll talk about all of these as the semester goes on, but killer microbes are not limited to only bacteria. They can include some eukaryotes as well. And they can also include viruses. Viruses are super weird and also very cool in terms of their biology. Viruses do not fall in the tree of life. And that's because viruses don't have a cell. So viruses are not cells. Viruses are most often not considered living. And the reason that they're not considered living is because viruses can't make their own energy. Even bacterial parasites or eukaryotic parasites that can't live outside of a host, they can at least make their own energy. But viruses can't. So that's why they're not considered living. Viruses have really interesting shapes, really interesting structures. We'll talk a lot more about viruses later in the semester, but here they're showing you some of the shapes. So here's tobacco mosaic virus. This is a virus of tobacco plants. Adenovirus, which causes things like the common cold or pink eye. Influenza viruses, which cause the flu. And I know we talk about how bacteria can make us sick, but bacteria can also get their own viral infections. So bacteriophage are viruses that infect bacteria. Here is a cartoon of what the HIV viral particle looks like. So this is, of course, the cause of HIV, which can progress to AIDS. Down here, this is an example of what something like Ebola virus might look like. And here, I know it's a little bit blurry, and I'm sorry about that, but this is what everybody's virus that we all know about now, COVID-19. So COVID-19 is a disease name, coronavirus disease in 2019. The virus that causes it is called Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2, or SARS Coronavirus 2. This is what it looks like as a cartoon. And one of the last types of microorganism, sort of organism, that we'll talk about is a prion. Prions are very weird. Very weird. They are not even viruses. They are simply a protein. They're a bad protein that has the wrong shape, and they will, what you're seeing in each of these is holes in the brain, so they cause degenerative conditions in the brain. Basically, they resemble things like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease. So they cause these holes in the brain. It's incurable. It's always fatal. And some of the differences between like a prion disease and something like Alzheimer's is that this is actually very rapid. From the onset of symptoms until death is only about 1 year. Whereas patients with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's can live for years or even decades after their original diagnosis. In cows, we call it bovine spongiform encephalopathy, BSE, but you've probably heard of it as mad cow disease. And if you eat a cow with mad cow, you can develop the human form of the disease. Again, we'll talk more about all of these different microbes and, again, because this is killer microbes, how all of them are trying to kill you as we progress throughout the semester. But hopefully this introduction gives you a good foundation in what we're talking about so that we're all kind of on the same page as we talk about all of these different organisms. If anything was unclear, please feel free to let me know. But again, this should be the foundational knowledge that we all need so that we can progress through talking about different kinds of infections and what's happening in all of them.